A few months ago, at the end of a coaching session about something unrelated, someone asked me how to cope with estrangement. And in my time coaching, and specifically working with grief, I'd only been asked about estrangement twice, despite how common it is. In the newly published book, No Contact, the percentage of American families experiencing estrangement is 27%. And Dr. Becca Bland reports that although no exact numbers are available in the UK, it's likely that as many families experience estrangement as divorce. So after reading No Contact, which is a relatively newly published book, and estrangement coming up more in conversation, I have been inspired to talk about it. I have been estranged from my sister for 14 years, and it's not something I talk about. It's not something I've ever talked about publicly, but over the last few months, I felt more compelled to. It was a deeply painful experience for many years, and still some aching sadness does creep in, but I've learned to live alongside it. Estrangement as grief is something that really needs time and attention, and that's definitely what I've given it, and what I've done in various ways over the years. Most of the stories you hear about estrangement are from people who have decided to go no contact, mostly with parents. And then there are also stories from parents who are mostly completely blindsided. They have no idea what's happened and are pretty indignant in the face of it. Not much is said about sibling estrangement, unless I'm looking in the wrong place. So if you know of any resources or literature, do let me know. But this is where my lived experience lies, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Although the relationship and circumstances around estrangement are very deeply important, the way you tend to grief can be applied the same across many situations. So in this video, I just want to let you know about all the things I've done to grieve my relationship with my sister over the last 10 years, because for the first 4 years, it's safe to say I was paralysed and didn't do anything with it at all. So what happened? My sister stopped talking to the whole family on my dad's 70th birthday. And I will always remember the night it happened. I had never experienced such an aggressive and an angry situation before. It was something completely surprising and shocking. It's something my nervous system was not equipped to deal with. I don't know why she cut everyone off. I will never know what that is. I can make some educated guesses based on what I have learned over the years about psychology and the deeply relational work that I've done with people. I can also make educated guesses based on my knowledge of my family's dynamics, some of our history, and how we were raised, but I will never fully know. What has been very painful over the years was trying to figure out whether I was collateral damage, like cut off by proxy, or part of the package with my parents being cut off, or whether I was part of the cause of the rupture. I don't know that. I do know the unintended part that I played the night it happened, but the decision to go no contact, it's never just going to be one event. It's likely going to be years and years and years of events, thoughts and beliefs all racking up and then culminating in one big blowout. Ultimately, I know two things to be true. My family was deeply hurt. There was disagreement about events, and I hold a lot of disappointment about behaviour. And if I know anything about grief and love, which I do, and the complex dynamics of families and human relationships, which I do, and I think we all do, then I know that to go no contact with my family would have been wholly necessary for her. And I believe that she was taking care of herself the best way that she knew how. There are some other things that I can surmise. Perhaps she didn't feel like she fit in to the way our family lived life. Perhaps she didn't have what she needed, and then she couldn't talk about it within the family, and then felt that she couldn't protect herself within it. Perhaps her worldview of what family should be wasn't met. What I do know is that she must have been in pain. It was easy for the first few years to write off her experience, call it crazy, selfish, until I sat down to truly try to understand it. I don't fully understand her experience. I don't fully agree with everything that she has done and said and thought, but I have come to my own understanding of what it may be. I had a go at putting myself in her shoes based on what I know. So what emotions did I feel? Here are the kind of things I experienced. What I didn't know then, as much as I know now, is how desperately I wanted a close family unit. Part of what could be explained by assumptive world theory, that as children we carry unconscious expectations about love, loyalty and safety that families should provide. And I also really resonate with Frances Weller's idea of grieving what we expected and did not receive, the deep longing for belonging, acceptance and a sense of village unconditionally. And for much of my childhood and teenage years, I yearned for a united family, a village. And for many years, I felt in the middle of a rupture and solely responsible for the repair and bearing the weight of failing at that task. And when my sister went no contact, I felt thrust back into that role. I became the one that my parents raised the issue with and placed expectations on to magically resolve it all. And when I didn't or couldn't, then I felt blamed. And I was angry for such a long time. I was angry about all the times I was rejected. For the first year, I reached out many times to stay in touch and to speak and was rejected every time. I became so desperate and I just could not accept the situation. I was angry about the way estrangement seeped into everything and it tainted everything with sorrow. I distinctly remember a cinema trip to see Les Mis with my father. And at the end, whilst getting up to leave, he collapsed back down in his seat, crying, because of the relationship that he had with that film and my sister. And I have never seen him cry so hard, and never did I since witness him in so much pain. I was so angry about the impact it had on my parents and the pain that they experienced. I was angry when my sister began to rebuild her relationship with my mum and then continued to ostracize my dad. I was angry that it meant that I also couldn't have a relationship with my niece. I was angry at the impact that it had on my relationship with my parents. And I was angry that I had been cut off in general. I thought that we had a good relationship. I would look after my niece. I would visit my sister regularly. We'd talk. We'd be there for each other. When she wasn't in a good place, I would go to her and support her as best I could. And I felt punished for a situation or a family dynamic that I didn't create and couldn't fix. I was angry about the narrative being sent out to extended family and not being able to have any input or control over that information. And I was so deeply sad, all the conversations, experiences, relationship building that I was missing out on with my sister and niece, all the things that we would no longer have. And I felt really sad and conflicted, as though I kind of had to choose sides between my sister and my parents. And there's many times that I've thought that my loyalty to my parents in that situation may also have contributed to the sense that I was perhaps then not a safe person for my sister. And I was just so sad that we were missing out on each other's lives and all the things that involves. There's something about the grief of bereavement that complicates the grief of estrangement. So in the back of your mind when you're estranged, the thought periodically will come to you that a family emergency may happen, that you will need to come face to face with that person again. And that happened when both my mum and my dad died, but in very different ways. So when my mum died, we had kind of a Facebook Messenger chat going on, and then we had contact after she died, at the funeral. And when my dad died, it was different. So one morning I got a call from him. I was due to collect him as he was going to spend the weekend with me. I had a really wonderful weekend planned with a steam train and a roast dinner. But But when I answered, it wasn't my dad on the other end of the phone, it was my sister. And I was in shock that she had called me. And then I was in shock when she told me that my dad was ill and that she thought that he needed to go to hospital. So after a conversation about all the options for getting him there, I ended up driving to pick them both up and to take him in. And then for 2 weeks until my father died, there was daily contact with my sister at the hospital, multiple crossovers with visits and time in the same space. And then the funeral, and we needed to have 2 funerals due to family circumstances. Contact with my sister at my mum's death was just as painful as the anticipatory anxiety thought it would be. My father's, after the initial shock and anxiety, the little anxiety spark at the beginning, it wasn't. And this, I believe, is thanks to grief work. So what did grief work look like? For me, so grief work around estrangement has been very continuous. So for the first 4 years, I had no idea what to do with it. I was just frustrated, angry, stressed, constantly dysregulated. I became defensive, and I was defensive out of desperation. And looking back, I know that I was so desperate to fulfill the role of fixer, so desperate not to lose a relationship. And I was so hurt and frightened that instead of listening as best I could or responding to situations thoughtfully, I often reacted from a place of that desperation. I know that I had the capacity for better communication than I showed at the time, but I wasn't able to access those skills because I was so overwhelmed with the emotion. And then in the next 10 years, I began to consciously start figuring out what this grief meant to me and how to live with it. I have written many letters over the years regarding estrangement. Some I just destroyed, some I released ceremonially, but there's 3 that stay with me. A letter to my sister full of confusion, questioning, sadness, anger, regret, yearning, wondering if she could answer why, or at least tell us. A letter to myself, just rooted in compassion. And then a letter to my parents expressing disappointment and frustration, but also love, and acknowledging their experience. I used the empty chair technique too, so more than once I placed an empty chair in front of me, imagined my sister sitting in it, and expressed everything I needed to say. Relationship work was really important. I asked myself what kind of relationships I wanted in my life, what I wanted them to look like, how I could create more of them, and how I could nurture the existing relationships that I had. I had to practice release and acceptance, and this meant letting go of hope that things would be different, grieving missed possibilities, and just also honouring the beauty and possibility in the life that I still had. I also had to remember the relationship with balance, because over time, I did learn to remember the relationship with my sister in a more balanced way, like the good parts, the painful parts, the mundane parts. And for me, there's still a connection. For me, that connection lies in remembering the relationship as it was, and then choosing what I want to hold on to now. And what I hold on to is deep love and compassion for her. I will always love my sister, and I'll always hold her in my heart with compassion. Even though I don't know her reasons, I understand something of the human needs and pain that can drive behaviour. And although I can't reconcile certain actions and their consequences, I can still recognise the human parts that influence them. Photography helped me so much. It helped me to explore change, distance, uncertainty, and connection. I took photos of things mindfully that were close but far, had a connection but were also separate. Things that demonstrated that relationships and life change. And using the mindful attitudes when approaching the photos, such as non-judgment, letting go, non-striving, was particularly helpful. Rumination, I had to learn when reflection became destruction. I practiced noticing my thoughts, feelings and emotions, allowing myself to experience them for a limited time, and then redirecting my attention to something more intentional and helpful. And identity, I had to keep reminding myself of who I am. I am not a victim. Estrangement doesn't define me. I know who I am, I know my values, what I bring to relationships, and what I contribute to the world. And then there's uncertainty. Ultimately, I had to accept that estrangement is nuanced and unresolved. I had to learn how to sit with difficult emotions and uncertainty without being consumed by them. Now, Kristin Neff has a free meditation on her website called Soften, Soothe, Allow, and that is particularly helpful for big emotions. And, two things can be true. For me, grief and estrangement mean learning to hold two truths at once. I have deep love and compassion for my sister, and I know that relationship isn't possible. Both are true. And even with all that, it is entirely possible to live alongside estrangement. Grief remains, but it doesn't have to consume everything, and pain also subsides. And in a way, sharing this experience and telling my story for the first time is more continuous grief work. Grief work doesn't ever really stop. But what helps is telling your story. Stories need to be told and they need to be witnessed.